Welcome back, fellow shop rats. Today here in the shop, we're going to do something just a little bit different than the norm. Normally, we're hammering away on this $500 paint job truck or the Stitches Challenger or the Oakland or the Duster or one of the other cars. But today, you and I are going to just pause and we're going to gather around the bead roller here and we're going to learn how to properly, or maybe not, pre-stretch metal before we roll beads in sheet metal.
This is My Cars Shop.
I would ask that you grab your safety gear, your safety glasses, and that kind of stuff, and let's gather around and begin the process. Now, I've not done this before. I've got some new equipment we're going to try. I understand the theory behind it. You've seen me make a few attempts on the channel of pre-stretching metal, but I'm going to kind of approach this from a little bit of a scientific point and see if we can break this down into something that makes sense so we can start to understand exactly how the metal moves and how to compensate for that. So we're going to be using our Eastwood bead roller, and I've got some stretching dies and we got our bead roll dies, and well, let's just get into it. We're using a 20 gauge piece of steel here. I don't want to assume that everybody understands the science or the theory behind how a bead roller works and why pre-stretching is important. So let's start with that. If we're using a flat piece of metal, and we'll use my hands as an example, and if I'm to run that metal through here, we have a die that stretches the metal down that way, and this die allows the metal to be stretched in well, helping to keep it flat. What's going to happen is, just like a hand will do, the metal is going to tend to do this. Now, we know that it does keep it a little bit flat, but what happens is as the metal does this, then all the other metal around kind of has to compensate for that. And it causes the metal to taco, if you will, and turn into a U, and there's a problem. So in order to compensate for that, we need to stretch the metal to allow room so that when we run this through here, we get our nice little bead without the metal around it distorting. In order to make this make sense, we really need to have a baseline to work from. So we need to know just exactly how much this metal shrinks and so forth when we pull this. So all we need to do is just establish a line. Doesn't have to be any specific number, but I'm going to pick, let's pick 1 inch. Let's pick 1.5 inches. Doesn't really much matter. Okay, 1.499. Okay, and we're going to put this right in here. Whoop. So I'm going to make a mark here and a mark here. These are just reference lines. Any dimension is going to work for this. You'll see why in just a minute. So just, you can see there, we know that is 1.4999. Okay, so 1.5. Now we're going to go through and roll a bead in here, and then we'll take a measurement on this again. So let's get this, I'm just going to go ahead and roll a bead straight through on it for now. So we're just getting contact right there. Okay, so we'll pull this down a half a turn. I'm not being real careful about it being on track, but another half a turn. Okay. Another half a turn. We're starting to taco up a little bit. And we're starting to get a little bit of a bead. Let's roll that down another half a turn. I'm going to have to go back and watch the video to see how many turns that was. You guys tell me how many it was? I don't remember. Okay, let's go. Another half a turn. All right, that's a decent bead. I'm not going to get too carried away. It's one problem I've noticed is I tend to over crank the beads because I'm trying to match factory depth, and I don't think that's wise. The whole point of a bead is that it is just there. So let's get our dimension. We'll put our little portable work table back in here. Now we're going to take another dimension. So you can see we're at 1.499, and when we come in here now, we can definitely see that we've shrunk because these lines were pretty much even with the points. So let's find out where we're at. So we're about 60 thousandths is what we have shrunk. So that's the baseline. That's the number we're going to work with. I need to go back and count the number of turns, or if you guys want to tell me how many turns it was, that'll help. And then we're going to go ahead and pre-stretch this metal to see if we can, figure this all out. All right, there we go. I'm going to hammer this a little bit flatter, but I decided I'm going to go ahead and do it on the same piece of metal. I'll probably just cut this off so it's similar to the same length, so we're comparing apples to grapefruits. But we know we definitely got a big taco here, so let me hammer that out a little bit, and then we'll make a mark on here, well, a couple of marks, and we'll pre-stretch it. We've got our stretching dies on here now. They're installed properly. The flat die goes on the top, the round one goes on the bottom. So that's like a super miniaturized little English wheel in some ways right there. So we've made ourselves a line here so we know where we're going to roll our bead. And then I'm going ahead and putting the reference marks again, just like we did over here. I'm doing it at 1.499 or 1.5 and drawing my lines, of course, directly off the tip. This is going to tend to be a lot of lather, rinse, and repeat on this, because I'm going to have to check this dimension a lot as I'm going along here until I know exactly where we're at. I'm going to get a little more aggressive on this. We're putting a lot of squish in that metal. All right, let's measure it and see where we're at. We are at, we put about 10 thousandths, so we got to put another 20 thousandths of stretch into that. One of the things I just realized I was doing was I was only going on the line, and I really need to zigzag pattern and stretch that whole area out. So that was my bad. It's just lack of experience. And, I probably could have looked in some instructions and figured that out. But I remember from using English wheel and seeing English wheels used, that's what you do. So go from there. But I think that's going to be, that's the way it should be going. Catch it a little bit there. There we go. So I'm going to stretch that whole area out is what I need to be doing. You can see it's starting to taco on us now. Just a little bit more. We're at about 24 thousandths right now. I'd like to get it to 30. This bead roller is not the whippiest thing in the world. I really need to make a brace to go in here to keep this thing from walking like this. So that's some of what we're dealing with, but it's not so much about the tension that you put on the wheels as it is about just continuing to work over the area. And just stretch out that whole area of metal. So we're trying to go from 150 to 153. I'm learning as we're doing this, so we're learning together, okay? This may not work at all. I may be completely off my rocker, but it's starting to feel better to me as far as mentally what I expect this metal should be doing and how I should be working it. So I think we're okay. We don't want to get too much tension on there. We're just trying to stretch that metal out a little bit. All right, let's check that. Now you can see we're really starting to taco it up. It looks like I've been working a little bit too much this way, but we'll see. So we've worked that whole area there. It's definitely got some stretch to it. We're at about 153, so 34 thousandths. So a little bit over. So let's switch out our dies over here, and then we'll run a bead in here, and we'll see what happens. You can see our metal is definitely got some stretch to it. We've got our bead roller dies on there. They're lined up now. So we'll take our pre-stretched metal and we'll see how it goes. Like I said, I've not pre-practiced this. I am sharing it with you raw. It'll be what it is. This could be success. It could be epic failure. We're going to learn together, and some of you guys may know more about this than I do. And if you see that I've screwed something up, then by all means tell me, because I'm always willing to learn. Again, we're going to follow the same line that we made there. I'm not going to go more than 2.5 turns probably. There's one right there. Okay. 1.5, 2. Two and a half. I'm not being as careful as I could or should be on this because it's not a production piece, but we're getting there and it's working. So let's go 3 turns. Just want to get that bead just a little deeper. This piece of metal that I'm using wasn't perfect anyway, but obviously you can see the difference that made between what we did here when we created a big taco and what we did here when it remained flat. So let's just a little bit of primer on there just to get a better feel for what that bead's actually looking like, and then we'll show it to you and we'll wrap it up. Oh, I wanted to do one more thing. If I did this right and my calculations were all correct, this should be back to that 1.49 or 1.5. You can see there, pretty darn close. I mean, look at the difference. So we are on to it, definitely. Let's see what this bead ultimately looks like. That's over in the oven drying real quick, and then we'll take a look at it. But I wanted to talk about a couple things. First time ever I've used those stretching dies to pre-stretch that metal, and I can see that once I've used it more, I'm definitely going to get onto it. I'm sure I'll get faster at it. It's just a matter of learning how it works. Ultimately, I would love to have an English wheel. Harbor Freight has a pretty decent unit for $300 or $400. Nowhere in the budget at this point. But I think these little dies are going to work pretty good. They were like $75 including shipping from Eastwood, and they're just like a little bitty English wheel, so you can, and it does the job good. The other thing that I wanted to mention, and there's Eastwood actually has a video on, is one of the premier bead rolling guys in the world, and they have him on there doing an episode bead rolling. Something that he said that I think is pretty significant. He actually is an artist, and he bead rolls all kinds of amazing art. He doesn't do a lot of pre-stretching. He does his beads little teeny bits at a time. He says if you just take your time and give the metal time to relax, it really won't distort that much.
I'm not that patient.
But I think it's an interesting thing to note, because I tend to just hog this thing down tight to get her done. I may be overdoing that. Like I said in that earlier, I tend to want to get these beads as deep as possible to make it match factory, and I really need to back up, think about that again, and realize that the point of a bead is to keep the panel, keep stiffness in the panel. It's not about cosmetics, it's about function. And I think that's very important for us to keep perspective on. We can actually distort the metal if we're tightening this down too much, because these two wheels come together and then they start actually stretching that metal while we're trying to, I'll bring you around here. We actually start stretching that metal while we're trying to roll the bead in there, and that's not good. So when I took this out of the bead, that took the metal out, I did not readjust that. And you can see we've got just a little bit of play. If this gets too tight, this will actually make matters a lot worse for us, because this thing here then can start to shear into the metal and cause distortion. And the same thing can happen back here with these. So we want to be sure that we're not overdoing it as far as our tension on the bead roll, so that we're not causing like double whammy problems. I'm still learning that one, and I've been using a bead roller for a long time. It's just something that I don't think about all the time. The second thing is this bead roller tends to distort a lot. So I need to make something to go in here on these smaller pieces to prevent this from doing this. It's a cheap bead roller. It was a couple $100 from Eastwood. It does the job. But the other thing that happens is when you really start putting a lot of tension on this thing, is these things start to walk about, and then your dies don't line up right, and that also causes a problem. So I want to make a fork that just goes down over both of them when I don't, and I can put that in at this point, whatever depth I need, up to, I think this is a 19-inch. Obviously, once you get back here, there's no point. But I would say anything from here forward, that will help keep these from distorting and splitting apart. That's what I'm trying to say. We might have gotten a little deeper with that one. I don't know, but it's respectable. I wouldn't be ashamed of that at all. And I was not being super careful with the bead, because I was focused more on watching the metal than I was on keeping my alignment. So the point of this was we stretched it about the same depth as here. It's hard to see because of the shadows of that, but you can see it there. With shiny paint, you can see it better. Our metal's pretty flat where this isn't. It's the same bead, pretty much the same depth, but taco flatbread. I think our first venture into this was really successful, and I'm anxious to learn more about using this by hands-on experience. But I had just a little bit of time today when I was home for lunch, and this was on my mind. I've been thinking about it for a while, and I thought, you know what? I just need to bring you guys into the shop, and let's work on this together and just share it with you. So thanks for gathering around the bead roller with me today. I appreciate it. And oh yeah, it's important. Rock!